In September 1991, shortly after the end of the Cold War, a cabal of elite bankers and intelligence spooks led by George H.W. Bush financed a $240 billion covert operations war chest through the purchase of 10-year securities that, as it happened, were scheduled to come due on September 12, 2001. Project Hammer was undoubtedly used for a wide variety of illicit intelligence operations, but mainly it was used to finance a covert economic operation against the collapsing Soviet Union, whereby unknown Western investors bought up much of the Soviet industry with a focus on oil and gas, crashing the Russian economy, looting its central bank, orchestrating what became known as the Great Ruble Scam, and a wide variety of other clandestine, state-assisted operations designed to thoroughly prevent Russia from ever contesting the U.S. as a world superpower, while in the process lining the pockets of these economic hitmen who swooped in to devour the collapsing Russian economy after the fall of the Soviet Union. A spectacular investment for all, at least until money laundering investigations began tracing all the money, or when the 10-year deadline came up and the securities became due and began the routine process of authenticity and ownership checks. Evidence shows that several federal and private investigations had already stumbled upon the Hammer Fund and were compiling evidence on it up until the 9/11 attacks. These included the Office of Naval Intelligence, or ONI, which was moved to the outer E-ring of the recently renovated section of the Pentagon that was targeted and destroyed on 9/11. According to E.P. Heidner, the ONI had been investigating crimes associated with the plundering of Russia. 39 out of the 40 people who worked in those offices were killed on 9/11, including the entire chain of command. The Pentagon's financial accounting offices in that same wing were also an obvious target, as were the passengers on board Flight 77, many of whom coincidentally held top-secret clearances and were connected with Pentagon black operations. Agents of the Office of Naval Intelligence had also been investigating financial transactions which were linked to securities being managed by those securities dealers in the World Trade Center that were also targeted. 31% of the 125 fatalities in the Pentagon were from the Naval Command Center that housed the Office of Naval Intelligence. 41% of the fatalities in the Twin Towers came from two companies that managed U.S. government securities, Cantor Fitzgerald and Eurobrokers. There were three major security brokers in the World Trade Center: Cantor Fitzgerald, Eurobrokers, and Garbin Intercapital. At 8:46 on the morning of September 11th, Flight 11 flew directly into Marshall McLennan's secure computer room in the North Tower, right below the floor on which Cantor Fitzgerald was situated. Cantor Fitzgerald was the largest security dealer in the U.S. Shortly after that, a massive explosion went off just under the FBI offices in the North Tower on the 23rd floor. Fires were reported on the 22nd floor at 8:47. There were also explosions and subsequent fires reported at Garbin Intercapital on the 25th floor and in the basement of Tower 1 as well. Shortly thereafter, at 9:03, Flight 175 hit the South Tower right below the floors on which Eurobrokers was situated. In all three cases, the explosive, fiery destruction consumed the offices and the several floors above, destroying files and trapping victims inside. In the midst of all this, Building 6 was destroyed by an explosion that took place before either tower fell. This secondary explosion took out a portion of the building which just happened to include the El Dorado Task Force's offices. The El Dorado Task Force was an interagency money laundering watchdog group responsible for coordinating all major money laundering investigations in the U.S. In the immediate aftermath of September 11th, these groups would be redirected to investigate terrorist financing. Building 6 was located directly between the North Tower and World Trade Center Building 7. While large portions of World Trade Center 6 were gutted by explosions and later by falling debris from the North Tower, the building itself did not suffer a global symmetric collapse at near freefall acceleration, as did Buildings 1, 2, and 7. FEMA photographer and 9/11 whistleblower Kurt Sonnenfeld took some interesting pictures of the U.S. Customs vault in the basement of World Trade Center 6, which was found completely empty and left with the door wide open. All of its contents appear to have been looted during the attacks. There is also evidence that gold was being looted from the vaults beneath World Trade Center 4. There were several early reports of a 10-wheel truck packed with stolen bullion caught fleeing World Trade Center 5 when the vehicle had become stuck on a collapsed ceiling brace, forcing the driver to flee the scene. Many researchers have stumbled across one or two of these anomalies from time to time: the empty vaults, the secondary explosions, the fireproofing upgrades on the exact floors coinciding with failure and impact in the towers, the suspicious power downs and evacuation drills, the World Trade Center tenants and security firms like AIG, Marsh & McLennan, and Kroll, and their close ties with the intelligence community, etc., etc. These anomalies are not unrelated, but nevertheless became lost inside the chaos of that September morn, the aftermath, and subsequent cover-ups. Okay, so what does all this mean? Overall, a critical mass of brokers from the major government security brokerages in the Twin Towers had to be eliminated to create chaos in the government securities market. A situation needed to be created wherein $240 billion of covert securities could be electronically cleared without anyone asking questions, which happened when the Federal Reserve declared an emergency and invoked its emergency powers that very afternoon. On September 14th, the Securities and Exchange Commission declared a national emergency and for the first time in U.S. history invoked its emergency powers under the Securities Exchange Act Section 12K and eased regulatory restrictions for clearing and settling security trades for the next 15 days. These changes would have allowed the estimated $240 billion in covert government securities to be cleared upon maturity without the standard regulatory controls around identification of ownership. The towers needed to be demolished to create a big enough mess that the illicit activities taking place behind the scenes that morning could be hidden in the confusion of that day. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about who did it and how. 9/11 whistleblower Richard Andrew Grove was a software salesperson for a company called Silverstream. Silverstream's technology was on the cutting edge of internet solutions, offering software to web-enable the critical business functions of Fortune 500 companies, basically integrating and making available on the web the disparate legacy applications and mainframes while simultaneously streamlining workflow and traditional paper processes, with an end result being a lower cost of operation and more efficient transactions. Silverstream had built internet transactional and trading platforms for Merrill Lynch, Deutsche Bank, Bankers Trust, Alex Brown, and Morgan Stanley, to name a few. Leading up to 9/11, Silverstream was designing specialized accounting software for a major client, Marsh & McLennan. Marsh is the world's largest insurance brokerage and was located right below Cantor Fitzgerald in the North Tower. Approximately 295 Marsh employees were murdered that morning, along with other innocent victims and employees who either knew too much or too little about their chosen work environment. But most importantly, Silverstream provided a specific type of connectivity that was used to link AIG and Marsh & McLennan, the first two commercial companies on the planet to employ this type of transaction. What then were Marsh and AIG doing, and why did they need to leverage technologies that no other commercial entity on the face of the earth needed to use to conduct business? The recovered hard drives from the World Trade Center, combined with Richard Grove's testimony, give us some intriguing clues. Grove discovered that Silverstream was overbilling Marsh to the tune of $7 million extra for fictitious and unneeded hardware. He also became aware of an exploitable flaw in the accounting software that had been sold to a variety of Marsh's clients and partners. When he brought this up to his superiors at Silverstream and others at Marsh, he was told to keep quiet and not to worry about it. But other friends of his at Marsh were also getting concerned and began documenting what was going on and raising concerns within the company. At last, they were finally granted a hearing with one of Marsh's high-ranking executives and were told to bring all their evidence to a hearing scheduled for 8:30 a.m. on September 11, 2001, on the 93rd floor. The high-ranking member of Marsh, who Grove did not name, would participate via teleconference from the safety of his home, while Marsh employees and potential whistleblowers, Gary Lasko, Catherine Lee, Ken Rice, Richard Brewhart, and John Oltzhofer, would die in the meeting room in the North Tower with all their evidence when American Airlines Flight 11 would impact that very section of the building. Richard Grove fortunately got stuck in traffic that morning and didn't make it. Computer hard drives recovered from the World Trade Center show a spike in suspicious transfers that took place within the World Trade Center as the 9/11 attacks were unfolding. Richard Grove is convinced that these suspicious money transfers were performed electronically using Silverstream software, and that the overbilling of Marsh was hush money for the operations. It would certainly have helped clear up that $240 billion in securities and make it look like any of those companies might have done it. The recovered hard drives and financial transactions from 9/11 all show clear evidence that something was going on that morning. Marsh's CEO at the time was Jeffrey Greenberg, the son of Maurice Greenberg of AIG. Most insurance companies were hurting badly in late 2001 after $40 billion in insurance settlements had been paid out for the devastation caused by the 9/11 attacks. Yet one insurance company did not suffer quite the same losses as the other companies did. American International Group, or AIG as it turns out, is much more than an insurance company. With its long ties to the intelligence community, AIG was founded by OSS operative Cornelius V. Starr, 2 R's, the uncle of Clinton's friend Kenneth Starr. AIG currently operates a complex network of shell companies and other entities which operate internationally and have been used for clandestine intelligence gathering and other covert activities for decades. The company that ran security in the World Trade Center, Kroll Associates, was owned by AIG. The CEO of AIG on 9/11 was a guy named Morris Greenberg, who was actually nominated for the position of Director of Central Intelligence after he authored a report for the Council on Foreign Relations, of which he's a high-ranking member, where he advocated that FBI and Drug Enforcement Agency agents operating abroad should not be allowed to act independently of either the ambassador or the CIA, lest pursuit of evidence or individuals for prosecution cause major foreign policy problems or complicate ongoing intelligence and diplomatic activities. Of course, this type of policy is essentially a continuation of things like Executive Order 12333 and the CIA-assisted Contra cocaine trafficking that went on as an immediate result. These backdoor agreements open the floodgates for government drug money laundering and narco-trafficking. Former LAPD narcotics detective turned whistleblower Michael Rupert has written a series of excellent articles documenting AIG's involvement in drug money laundering, undoubtedly revealing yet another motive for the invasion of Afghanistan, a country which currently produces over 90% of the world's heroin supply. Drugs are arguably the most profitable commodity on the entire international market, and drug money was undoubtedly a motive behind the invasion of Afghanistan and consequently the 9/11 attacks. While companies like AIG launder the drug money for big banks, the actual drug production and trafficking can be traced back to the same Iran-Contra affiliates like Richard Armitage and Frank Carlucci. Unfortunately, that rabbit hole is a bit too deep and off-topic to get into here. I will mention that DynCorp was heavily involved, as well as Stewart Air Force Base in upstate New York, where the 2 flights out of Boston crossed paths simultaneously and shut off their transponders before making their way to the Twin Towers. Many researchers believe that the MENA operation was moved to Stewart Air Force Base after Barry Seal got whacked. Richard Armitage was the Deputy Secretary of State on 9/11, and according to whistleblower Michael Springman, he was the man responsible for granting visas to 15 out of 19 of the 9/11 hijackers, allowing them to enter the U.S. and pursue flight training. Frank Carlucci is the chairman of the Carlyle Group and was in Washington, D.C. on 9/11, having just met with George H.W. Bush and the brother of Osama bin Laden on Carlyle Group business. Frank Carlucci was also the chairman of BDM International, a company that served as a front for State Department black operations. Frank Carlucci's employees at BDM International left to take charge of Stratesec, the World Trade Center and airport security firm. Corporate Operating Officer Barry W. McDaniel, an ex-military expert in logistics and materials distribution, and CEO Wirt Dexter Walker III, who is a distant Bush cousin from the Herbert Walker line, with an extensive history of managing CIA front companies. Marvin Bush, the president's brother, was also a board member at Stratesec, although Stratesec maintained contracts for security upgrades which were set to expire on September 11, 2001. They were not the company officially charged with World Trade Center security. This role was assigned to a risk management firm called Kroll Associates. Kroll's chairman, Jerome Hauer, was a longtime personal friend of ex-FBI counterterrorism expert John O'Neill and was responsible for O'Neill's appointment as head of security for the World Trade Center just a few days prior to the 9/11 attacks. O'Neill is the world's leading expert on Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda and was a potential 9/11 whistleblower with hard evidence of White House complicity in the protection and shielding of the 9/11 hijackers from all means of federal investigation. Al-Qaeda hijacking suspects were flagged by the Able Danger terrorist tracking program, which was also shut down by the White House. Able Danger whistleblower Anthony Schaefer claims the U.S. government destroyed over 6 terabytes of data related to Able Danger, which he also claims identified 9/11 ringleader Mohammed Atta as early as February of 2000. Those atop the chain of command in the White House, military, and intelligence establishment deliberately ignored all the warning signs of an impending attack, a clever strategy of plausible deniability which also served to portray those in charge as incompetent rather than complicit. In every major head throughout the chain of command on 9/11, from NORAD to the military, we see a repeated theme of complicity through negligence or incompetence. After 9/11, failure and incompetence was rewarded and whistleblowers were silenced. Combined with the fact that 6 corporations control 90% of the media and CIA operations like Mockingbird admit to taking over and subverting our U.S. media, we can understand how such a big lie could have been kept from the American public for so long. But if you stop and take the time to do your research, you'll find all the evidence is there, hidden beneath a mountain of disinfo and lies. It's been 10 years since 9/11 happened, and we are left with hundreds, if not thousands, of unanswered questions about.
Good afternoon. My name is John Michael Turner. I currently reside in Burlington, Vermont. I served with Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines as an automatic machine gunner. There's a term, once a Marine, always a Marine, but there's also the term, eat the apple, F the core. I don't work for you no more.
That was John Michael Turner stripping his medals and ribbons from his chest and throwing them into the audience to the applause.
As soon as Congress acts on this bill, the men our intelligence agencies believed helped orchestrate the 9/11 attacks can face justice. The bill would also provide clear rules for our personnel involved in detaining and questioning captured terrorists. The information that the Central Intelligence Agency has obtained by questioning men like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed has provided valuable information and has helped disrupt terrorist plots, including strikes within the United States. For example, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed described the design of planned attacks on buildings inside the U.S. and how operatives were directed to carry them out. That is valuable information for those of us who have the responsibility to protect the American people. He told us the operatives had been instructed to ensure that the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping. That the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping. He gave us information that helped uncover Al-Qaeda cells' efforts to obtain biological weapons. We've also learned information from the CIA program that has helped stop other plots.
World Trade Center 7 had always been considered the starting point for rebuilding. Located north of the slurry wall, 7 had been cleared faster than the rest of the site.
Why?
And there had been no bodies to recover.
Sure.
Pelted by debris when the North Tower collapsed, 7 burned until late afternoon, allowing occupants to evacuate to safety.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. I said, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Your official response was that it was the firefighters. My question is, it was pretty clear that you meant the building, and if it was the firefighters, they already are outside the building by 12 because the water lines were broken.
Ask the question.
And the fire chief that you said you spoke to, Fire Chief Negro, denies talking to you on that day of 9/11. Can you answer those questions and address the theories against you?
I suggest to everybody's consideration that we all look at the thousands of pages of testimony that have been rendered in the many years since 9/11, and let's use today's session for something that's...
Are you aware of testimony of bombs in the building before the building collapsed, sir? Are you aware of that testimony?
longer a football field. There are now only 42,000 feet. And the building is going to contain not 2 million feet, but 1.7 million. And that's one of the sacrifices we have to make. I said, let's make it and let's get on with it. And so, next thing you know, we've got the designs of the building. And the first design meeting was in April of 2000. And construction began shortly thereafter in 2002. And so, next thing you know, we've got the designs of the building. And the first design meeting was in April of 2000. And construction began shortly thereafter in 2002. But we ran into a problem. We couldn't collect the insurance because the insurance companies didn't want to pay. There were 22 insurance companies defending 22 insurers who didn't want to pay their obligations under the policies. And so they took me to court. And I had to beat them in court, the lower court, and then had to take an appeal and win in the upper court. So they owed me $4.5 billion. A new governor was just elected, Elliot Spitzer, an old friend who I knew well. I said, Elliot, if you don't help me, I'll never collect from the insurance companies. And guess what? He listened, and he said, you know what? You're entitled. I'm going to get you the money. And in 6 months, he got me the $4.5 billion.
President Bush spoke from Florida. At that time, he's spoken since via videotape from Louisiana. Around 10 o'clock, a plane crashed at the helicopter pad at the Pentagon, did damage, set fire to portions of the Pentagon. There have been some casualties. Any dead, we don't know. There were some injured because we saw them at the Pentagon. Then the South Tower incredibly collapsed. Then the North Tower, the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center collapsed. And one pauses after you say that because, you know...
And organized in that fashion, that causes me concern. I certainly agree with what Senator McCain said about the fact that, you know, many, many years ago, we abandoned human intelligence. The attitude was that only bad guys have spies, and good guys don't need... And organized in that fashion, that causes me concern.
I have made it clear that the United States government had nothing to do with this.
The next job was to load the Met, a rickshaw-like wagon the astronauts would use to transport their tools of exploration and collected samples.
And we know that it's all artificial, and Hollywood makes it.
Completely in one side, and there it is. The plane went right through the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Army retired, and I spent 32 years in the military, and ended up as a Major General. In my last assignment, I was responsible for all of the Army's strategic intelligence forces around the world. I got sent to Korea early in my life, and I'd been there about a week. And my boss, who was a full colonel, said, report to the SINC. I said, the SINC is the commander-in-chief of all forces. So I reported in and saluted, and he said, young man, you are going to redo the North Korean order of battle. Order of battle. Order of battle? I didn't have a clue what that meant. Not a clue. So we went down the same walkway that goes to the mess hall that I passed this Quonset hut every time I'd gone to meal. And he unlocks the door, we go in, he said, go over there and take a look. Okay, walked over and took a look, and I said, holy smokes, because what was there was SR-71 photography. Now, for those who are not familiar, the SR-71 was an early, very high altitude reconnaissance plane. And it was taking photographs anywhere where they needed high altitude photography. I looked at this, wow, because I process my information visually. I'm a very high visual. I'm a visual kino, which is a visual that I process my information by, but I test it kinesthetically by feeling. But I'm primarily a visual. You can see the entire structure of what the North Korean army had created on the other side of the mountain. The net result was that I did put the North Korean order of battle in perspective, presented it to the Sink before I left, and it became his tool for making decisions of where he placed his troops, what he did, how he organized for whatever was coming. Fortunately, nothing ever happened. However, he had the information from my essentially map reading, or photo reading, photo interpretation reading, so that he could make the right decision on how to handle the situation. I actually was responsible for all of the Army's strategic imagery. And when I say imagery, that's not just photo, it's radar, it's all of the different kinds of imagery that you can have. I was responsible for all of the Army's strategic units that do that kind of work. Let me fast forward now, because that brings me to the real intention of where I'm trying to go with this. 9/11. 9/11 happens. At the time, my wife and I were in Hawaii. We were attending a conference, and I think it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, 3 or 3:30 in the morning, I get a phone call. And it's one of my officers. I'd retired by that time. It was one of my officers who had served under me, and a fabulous officer. And she said, "Sir, the United States is at war." I said, "See, what are you talking about?" She said, "The United States is at war." I said, "Come on, see, what have you been drinking?" She said, "Listen to me. Go turn on the television. The United States is at war." I said, I still didn't believe. I go turn on the television. Bingo, I see the towers coming down. I said, "Oh, that's a joke." I switched channels, towers going down. I switched channels, towers going down. I said, "Oh my God." So I thanked her for the information. I turned to Rima and I said, "You watch. I guarantee you right now that the information about that attack was in the system and somebody missed it." Very important. The information was there to know that that attack was coming, and somebody didn't see the signals. And that's from my own personal intelligence background. All of my experience after that in the intelligence world tells me that when something that big goes by, somebody missed the information. So I was a believer, absolute believer, that the attack was a terrorist attack, that it was all done by other forces. And after that periods, my wife began to put pieces together, and she said, I don't think that attack was done by the enemy, the terrorists that you indicated. I said, you're wrong. She said, I don't believe it. I said, you're wrong. And so she began to find bits and pieces of information, and she would present them to me, and I said, no, not my government. My government would not tell a lie like that. And I just disbelieved. I was so ingrained in my belief system that I could not believe, I literally could not believe that anybody but a sort of Arab terrorist could do something like that. And then one day, I saw a picture. It was a photograph of the Pentagon and the hole in the Pentagon. And I looked at it and I said, wow. And then I looked at it again. I said, something's wrong. Something's wrong with this picture. Then I kept looking at it. And then I began to not look at it just at a glance, but to study the photograph itself. What's wrong with this picture? Why is your belly saying, my kinesthetic aspect of my processing system saying something wrong with that picture? Well, there was something wrong. And so I analyzed it not just photographically, I did measurements, I did all kinds of it. I checked the plane, the length of the nose, where the wings were. I did all of the measurements. I took the measurements of the Pentagon, the depth of the destruction in the Pentagon. Conclusion, airplane did not make that hole. I went public at the time. I am the highest ranking officer, I believe, that has ever gone public. That whatever that story was, the official story, was not true. Now, I was very careful to not say what it was because I couldn't prove it. I was careful to say it was not the airplane that did that because I can prove that it was not the airplane. In the hole, however, was a turbine. Looked like the turbine from a missile. I can't prove that. I don't know. But there was something there that did not look like the engine from an airplane, but did look like a turbine from a missile. Later, I saw another photograph of one of the sensors on the outside of the Pentagon. Now, all of the sensors had been turned off, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? That day, why would all of the sensors around the Pentagon be turned off? Ooh, that's strange. I don't care what the excuse is, that's strange. There happened to be one that apparently did not get turned off. And in that picture, coming in, flying into the Pentagon, you see this object. And it obviously hits the Pentagon. When you look at it, it does not look like an airplane. Later, sometime later, after I'd gone public, that imagery was changed. It had, it got a new suit around it that now looked like an airplane. But when you take the suit off, it looks more like a missile, not like an airplane. Thank you.
If people continue.
Astronauts to the moon.
10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2,
Welcome to reality.
What's going on, everyone? It's Jaronism, back with another video for you today. Wanted to let you listen to a little slip-up that I caught by former President Bill Clinton when he was on Neil deGrasse Tyson's show recently, and just talk about 9/11 for a moment, what should have been a wake-up call for all of America, and it has been for some, but way too many are no longer capable of even thinking for themselves. So this is just a quick video with some of these observations, and I'll start with a quick presidential prediction. The following man will be, in my opinion, either president in 2017, and if not president, well, then he will be taking the Security General spot of the United Nations when Ban Ki-moon's term ends December 31st, 2016. Of course, I'm talking about Mr. Executive Order himself, Barack Obama.
I'm aware that there's still...
You get to hold your own opinions. You'll believe what your programmers tell you, despite all of your own observations. Listen now as Bill Clinton gives away a little bit more info than he would like to. But does it change the mind of anyone? Or will they just continue to follow the scripted programming courtesy of your long since paid for and controlled mainstream media?
By the time I had been a governor 12 years, when I got elected president, I felt that there were basically three components to any job like that. You had to have a vision for where you wanted to go, lay out a strategy, and try to execute that. That's the one thing. Second, you had to deal with the incoming fire. When George Bush and Al Gore ran for president, they had three debates. Nobody said, what are you going to do when the twin trade towers come down and the Pentagon's bombed?
What was that, Bill? When the twin trade towers come down and the Pentagon's what?
Twin trade towers come down and the Pentagon's bombed.
Oh, bombed. Sir, Trade Center was hit by a plane, as we've all been told before. Haven't you heard George Bush?
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty.
In fact, wasn't it you who, after being questioned if you'd be open to a new investigation on the events of 9/11, told people that we look like a bunch of idiots for questioning the given narrative?
What are you screaming about? Let him talk.
Support a new investigation into the attacks of 9/11.
Are you one of those that was an inside job, guys? Well, let me tell you something. The great thing, first, Hillary agrees we should end the war. But we've heard from you now. Now you hear from me. I'll let you be rude and interrupt me. Scream at the top of your lungs. "9/11 was not an inside job. It was an Osama bin Laden job with 19 people from Saudi Arabia. They murdered 3,000 Americans and other farmers, including over 200 other Muslims. And we look like idiots, folks, denying that the people who murdered our fellow citizens did it when they are continuing to murder people all around the world. So we heard from you. You go away."
Bill, we've heard from you. You go away.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty.
Which is terrorism.
That causes me concern. I certainly agree with what Senator McCain said about the fact that, many, many years ago, we abandoned human intelligence. The attitude was that only bad guys have spies, and good guys don't need...
This is the timeline.
World Trade Center 7 had always been considered the starting point for rebuilding. Located north of the slurry wall, 7 had been cleared faster than the rest of the site, and there had been no bodies to recover. Pelted by debris when the North Tower collapsed, 7 burned until late afternoon, allowing occupants to evacuate to safety.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Or thousands?
I really don't want to know. Is a Floyd.
And Rudy Giuliani, mayor of New York, tells ABC's Peter Jennings that he was aware the towers would be coming down.
What is going on now is a massive rescue effort.
Do you believe it's hundreds or thousands?
I really don't want to say right now, Peter. I think it's going to be a horrible number. I saw people jumping out of the World Trade Center. I saw some of the firefighters who I know going into the building. And we were in a building in which we were trapped for about 10-15 minutes. And we set up headquarters at 75 Barclay Street, which was right there with the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, the head of emergency management. And we were operating out of there when we were told that the World Trade Center was going to collapse. The World Trade Center was going to collapse. It was going to collapse. It was going to collapse.
On September 11th at 5:20 in the evening, the leaseholder of the World Trade Center complex, Larry Silverstein, gave a public interview on PBS in 2002, and he said that they pulled that building, which is a demolition term for intentionally bringing down a building. This man made over $5 billion from those buildings' destruction, and I want to know if there was ever a formal investigation into Larry Silverstein, the leaseholder of the World Trade Center complex, and his ties to this entire event.
I don't believe there's been a formal investigation. I haven't heard that. I don't know that. I do know that that wall, I remember, was in danger, and I think that they made a decision based on the danger that it had of destroying other things, that they did it in a controlled fashion. He's part of the reconstruction effort for the memorial and the use of the land, etc. There's been a long tug of war going on in New York. I am not following every aspect of it that is not in my jurisdiction, so to speak. But I'll check on what the story is. I'll take a look at it based on what you said. You're the first people.
As soon as Congress acts on this bill, the men our intelligence agencies believed helped orchestrate the 9/11 attacks can face justice. The bill would also provide clear rules for our personnel involved in detaining and questioning captured terrorists. The information that the Central Intelligence Agency has obtained by questioning men like Khalek Sheikh Mohammed has provided valuable information and has helped disrupt terrorist plots, including strikes within the United States. For example, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed described the design of planned attacks on buildings inside the U.S. and how operatives were directed to carry them out. That is valuable information for those of us who have the responsibility to protect the American people. He told us the operatives have been instructed to ensure that the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping. That the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping.
A football field. There were now only 42,000 feet. And the building is going to contain not 2 million feet, but 1.7 million. And that's one of the sacrifices we have to make. I said, let's make it and let's get on with it. And so, next thing you know, we've got the designs of a building. And the first design meeting was in April of 2000. And construction began shortly thereafter in 2002.